Today I'm going to show you how to make garlic pull-apart bread two different ways. For this recipe, you need 5 cups of all-purpose flour, 2.5 teaspoons of salt, 2 tablespoons of butter, 2 tablespoons of white sugar, 2 teaspoons of dry active yeast, 1 cup of milk, and 1 cup of warm water. You're going to need a large mixing bowl, a rubber spatula, a wooden spoon, and a little bit of extra flour on the side for dusting. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your flour and your salt and you're going to combine them well together in a big bowl. In the meantime, you're going to take your warm water, you're going to sprinkle over your yeast over the water, you're going to add your sugar, and then I like to stir this a little bit just to make sure that all of the yeast has come in contact with the water and the sugar is mixed in well, and that's going to help feed the yeast and also activate it. So I'm going to stir all of the salt into the flour. I want to make sure that the salt is mixed well in so that when I add my yeast mixture, it does not come in contact with any large pockets of salt. So now I'm going to add my milk to my recipe and I'm going to start to combine it in slowly. After I've combined it, I'm going to add my yeast mixture to the flour. Now I'm going to start bringing this dough together. I'm going to turn the bowl while I'm mixing this with my spoon. Pretty soon it's going to be hard to mix this dough with a spoon, so I am going to mix to use my hands. But I want to make sure that I'm starting it off this way just to make sure that I'm scraping the sides of the bowl well. When I'm about 3/4 of the way mixed with the liquid and the flour, I'm going to add my small amount of butter. And at this point, this butter is going to help really smoothen out this dough. Not only does the butter add flavor, but it also is going to add moisture to the recipe. That's going to help it have a great texture when we bake this dough. So now I'm going to keep on kneading and mixing this dough inside the bowl for as long as I can. When I feel like it is becoming too difficult to knead in the bowl, I am actually going to pour it out onto the table. But I want to do it here as long as I can because it actually keeps the mess limited on the table. So here I am going right onto my countertop. If you feel like the dough is a little bit sticky, you can actually dust the table with a little bit of flour. You don't want to add too much flour because that will change the quality of the dough and dry it out, but a little bit at a time is okay. So I see that it's sticking to my fingers a little bit to the table. So I'm just going to dust a little bit just to help it not stick as much. So I'm going to knead this dough for about 15 minutes. Now you can easily do this recipe in a large mixer, but you know that we always like to show you how to do it by hand because we feel you learn more from the process by doing it this way. So 15 minutes of kneading until we see a nice and smooth and dough that when I press into it, it springs back and the dent doesn't just sink in. Remember, when you're kneading, you're always just folding the dough over and then pushing it out. This is a very large dough, so it does get a little bit difficult. If you're having a hard time with the dough, you can actually cover it with a bowl and let it rest for a little bit and then start again. That will make it more pliable for you to use because the gluten has relaxed. So I am at the point where I am just about ready to put it in my bowl. I'm going to add a little bit, just a touch of oil to the bottom of my bowl just to help it not stick while it is fermenting. So I swirl it around in the oil, making sure to get oil on the sides of the bowl. And and then flip the dough over so that an oiled side is face side up, and we like it to be oiled so it doesn't dry out or form a skin. I'm going to cover it tightly and I'm going to let it ferment for 2 hours or until it's doubled in size. Now we're going to make our garlic butter. For our garlic butter, you're going to need 8 tablespoons of butter, which is 1 stick of butter, not melted but very soft, 2 teaspoons of kosher salt, 2 teaspoons of dried parsley, 1 teaspoon of dried oregano, 1 tablespoon of grated Parmesan cheese, and 4 cloves of minced garlic. If you wanted to add fresh herbs, fresh parsley or oregano to this mixture, you could. You would double the amount. So you would need 4 teaspoons of fresh chopped parsley and 2 teaspoons of fresh oregano. So I'm going to need 2 different containers for my recipe today. I'm going to use a loaf pan, and I'm also going to use an oven-proof bowl for my recipes. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to divide my dough in half. Our first pull-apart bread would be in the loaf pan, and it's going to be one that has slices piled on top of each other that you place in the loaf pan. And when they bake, they really bake in layers that you can actually pull apart. It is actually pretty delicious. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to flour my counter or my cutting board, whatever you are using. I'm going to flatten out the dough a little bit, and I'm going to start to roll it out. And we want to roll this dough out to a large rectangle or square, about a 16 to 20. You want the layers to not be very thin. You want them to be about 1/4 of an inch thick. So we don't want to make this too large of a square or rectangle. So about 16 by 20. And what you want to do is make sure that when you're rolling it out, you always start from the center and you work your way out. This way you have even thickness throughout the whole dough. So when you get to the correct size, what you're going to do is you're going to take half of your butter garlic mixture, and we're going to spread it out throughout the whole dough, all the way from edge to edge. If you feel like you make this recipe one time and you don't have enough garlic butter, you can absolutely increase that recipe. So as you can see, I'm just kind of spreading the butter mixture all the way out. I'm using a butter knife, but you can use an offset spatula, you can use a spoon, you can use a palette knife, whatever you have on hand. I just don't want to use anything sharp because I don't want to cut through the dough. Now I'm getting ready to cut my dough, and I'm going to cut it the width of my loaf pan. So I kind of measured the top of the dough, and don't worry if you have extra slices on the side that aren't the same thickness. I'll show you what you're going to do with them at the end. I'm going to cut them all about the same height and width of the loaf pan. And then I'm going to start to stack them on top of each other. Okay. I'm going to take my loaf pan. I'm just going to spray it with a little bit of pan spray. It's already a non-stick pan, so I didn't really need to add too much. Plus, there's a lot of butter inside the recipe. So this is just for a precaution. And now what you're going to do is you're just going to stack all of these layers on top of each other. I'm going to keep on stacking them on top of each other until I have finished all of the dough. At the end, when I have the pieces that don't really make a full piece, I'm just going to kind of stick them together and put them in the front. Don't really worry that maybe they won't look good. When the dough proofs, they rise together and it actually gives it a really nice look. So at this point, I am ready to let it proof. I'm going to let it proof covered in a warm area for about an hour until it doubles in size. But first, I'm going to make my second half of the dough. This dough is slightly different. we are going to actually stuff these little dough balls with mozzarella cheese. So I have cubed up about 1/4 pound of mozzarella cheese into, tiny squares, and we're going to fill them all with cheese. I cut about 24 pieces here, but I think that if you were to do 36 pieces or 40 pieces, smaller balls, I think that I would have gotten a better result. There's my mozzarella cheese that I'm going to put onto each one of these dough rectangles. So now I'm going to close the cheese into the dough, and what I like to do is I fold it over, I scrunch it, and then I actually rub it on the table to help seal the seam. So I put the seam on the bottom and I roll it tightly in my hands, kind of cup over it, just to make sure that it is sealed completely. So here are all my cheese stuffed dough balls. And what I'm going to do is I am going to spray my bowl that I'm going to bake them in. And I'm going to toss them inside of this garlic mixture. Now for this half of the recipe, I actually melted the garlic butter in the microwave for like 10 seconds because I want to be able to coat them with this mixture. And it's much easier to coat them when it's liquid than it is when it is a solid butter mass. I have my last couple of garlic stuffed mozzarella balls. I'm going to make sure they're in a nice even layer. I'm actually going to cover them with either plastic or a clean cloth, and I'm going to let these proof as well for about an hour. Now these are ready to go into a 350-degree oven for about 30 minutes. Check them periodically, because if you feel like that they are getting very browned on top, you could lower them to the bottom shelf, and you can actually put a little bit of foil on the top of each one of the loaves, and this will help them steam a little bit in the inside and not brown on the outside. This way they will be done and you won't have them burnt. Just be careful that when you're adding the aluminum foil, the pans are very hot, so I like to use a towel to help me kind of fold the aluminum foil over the sides of the pans. So this is going to go back in the oven, and to check to see if it's done, you can actually put a thermometer inside the center of the bread, and when it gets to about 175 degrees, you could take it out of the oven because it will carry over to about 180 degrees, and that's when it'll be fully cooked. So now I'm going to take the loaves out of the pan. So the first one, I'm just going to use a spatula, and I'm going to help loosen the sides just to make sure that it's going to come right out of the pan. I'm just going to lift it, and you notice that it really does stay together after the baking process. The next one, I'm going to flip out of the bowl because the bowl was slightly greased. It should come right out. And in order to eat both of these breads, you just pull slices off. For this one, you actually would take one of the garlic balls and you could just pull them apart really very easily. And you look inside, we have a little bit of cheese. Maybe next time I would add a little bit more cheese. Hope you enjoyed this recipe. Let us know if you have any questions.